So, apparently vampires are real? Not the cape-wearing, garlic-dodging, sparkly Edward Cullen kind, but actual people who call themselves living vampires. And let me tell you, when I first heard this, I thought, cool, so do I get to join Team Dracula or Team Blade? But no, it's way weirder than that.
Dracula.
Hi, I'm Jess, your friendly neighborhood ex-pagan turned skeptic, and today we're going down a very weird rabbit hole. Or maybe I should say, dun dun dun, bat cave? Yeah, buckle up, because we're talking about people who actually identify as real-world vampires.
Being a vampire in the 20th century is a nightmare.
When I was 13, I was convinced I was a human living vampire, or HLV for short. I would literally drink the bloody juice that came out of rare steaks and think, ah yes, my dark gift awakens.
God, what a dork.
Spoiler alert, it wasn't vampirism, it was anemia and a love of goth aesthetics. But when you're 13, every weird quirk feels like destiny, right? It does, right? So you might be asking yourself, what's a human living vampire? In this subculture, you'll hear two main types, and that is the sanguinarians, and then you've got the psi-vamps. So the sanguinarians say they need periodic blood, usually from consenting donors, and the psi-vamps say they need life energy, or chi, or prana, taken through proximity or ritual. They organize into houses and courts with etiquette, roles, and sometimes written codes. If goth D&D with bylaws popped into your head, you're not wrong. Researchers have actually surveyed these communities. The Atlanta Vampire Alliance ran a questionnaire in the mid-2000s, gathering hundreds of self-reports about identity, feeding, ethics, and health. The data aren't representative of all vampires, but they show that this isn't just one or two edgelords in a trench coat. Now here's where my personal story comes in. When I was 13, I wasn't just dabbling in steak juice and brooding poetry. I fell headfirst into Delphi forums. For those too young to remember, Delphi was basically like early Facebook groups, but with gothier fonts, endless usernames like Nightshade Eternal 93, and a whole lot of mysterious roleplay energy. I landed in a forum where people talked about awakenings, blood, psychic feeding, and supernatural powers, and I finally thought, my people! What I didn't know is that a lot of them were actually role-playing White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade without ever admitting it. That tabletop RPG had clans, hierarchies, and masquerade laws, and these adults stayed in character 24/7. So there I was, a wide-eyed 13-year-old, dead serious while they were mixing fiction with reality. One nameless, terrible human even convinced me that yes, you are a human living vampire. And I was hooked. The gothic romance, the tragedy, the dark poetry of it all, it was intoxicating. This was my secret world, or at least I thought it was. Now, here's where things get interesting. Human living vampires aren't just some random Tumblr invention. The modern community started to really crystallize in the 90s and early 2000s, piggybacking off golf subculture and Anne Rice fandoms and yes, White Wolf's Vampire the Masquerade role-playing game. But what made it more than just roleplay was that the people who insisted that no, this is my identity. There were early newsletters, mailing lists, and eventually forums where vampires started codifying their rules. By the early 2000s, groups like the Atlanta Vampire Alliance were organizing surveys and trying to treat this as a serious identity group.
Seriously? Seriously?
let's talk about the Atlanta Vampire Alliance, or AVA. In 2006, they launched the Vampirism and Energy Work Research Study. This wasn't just a silly online poll, it was a detailed questionnaire distributed to self-identified vampires around the world. What did they find? Well, they found that over 700 participants took part from across different countries. About 35% identified as sanguinarians, drinking blood in some capacity. Roughly 40% identified as psychic vampires who feed on energy. Others were hybrids or unsure. Many reported feeling weak, sick, or out of balance if they didn't feed. The study wasn't peer-reviewed and it definitely biased since it came from within the community, but it's still the biggest data set we have on modern vampires, and it shows just how widespread this belief actually is. Now, one of the funniest things about the vampire scene is how it overlaps with all sorts of other woo. Like once you've accepted I am a creature of the night who feeds on life force, the door is wide open for everything else. Take Reiki, for example. You've got people in the community saying, well, vampires are basically natural Reiki masters. We can feel energy, we can manipulate it, we can draw it out. Which I can also draw energy out of you if I talk long enough about my D&D character, but okay. Or astrology. I've legit seen vampires who time their feedings with moon phases. Like, oh sorry, I can't drain your aura tonight. Mercury is in retrograde and it messes with my chakras.
It's fascinating. A remarkable example of a retrograde civilization.
And then there's the crossover with pagan and Wiccan ritual. A lot of modern vampire houses borrow straight from ceremonial magic. They've got altars, candles, invocations, basically paganism with more leather pants. I say this with love because I was that leather pants kid. It shows how once you've already primed yourself to accept magical thinking in one form, it becomes really easy to blend in all the others. It's like spiritual buffet. You take a little astrology, a little energy healing, sprinkle in some vampiric aesthetic, and boom, you've got yourself a personal mythology that feels super deep, but kind of collapses if you poke it with, science. Let's be real. If you were a teenager in the 90s or early 2000s, vampires were everywhere. You had Interview with the Vampire making everyone swoon over long-haired sad boys. You had Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was totally part of the Scooby Gang, where somehow vampires had nightclubs but also went to high school. You had Blade, which was basically Matrix meets Fangs, and of course you had Vampire the Masquerade, a role-playing game that was the gateway drug for half the people who later went, oh wait, I'm not role-playing anymore, I'm a real vampire.
You're not a real vampire.
And here's the kicker. Human living vampire community doesn't always want to admit how much of their vibe comes straight out of pop culture. But come on, the candles, the velvet, the clan hierarchies, it's all straight out of White Wolf games. I didn't know that when I was 13 on Delphi forums. I thought I'd stumbled onto some ancient cabal of immortals. In reality, half of them were just really committed VTM fans who forgot to break character. And me, I was the kid going, yes, Lord Ravenblood, please tell me more about my sacred vampiric heritage. Okay, so one thing you learn real fast hanging around fringe communities, wherever there's a belief, there's somebody trying to cash in on it. And yes, the vampire scene has had its share of scams. For example, back in the early 2000s, there was this so-called Vampire Donor Club. Basically, it promised to hook up vampires with human blood donors for a small, okay, not so small fee, and people paid it. It was like Tinder, except instead of swiping right for dinner dates, you were swiping right for a pint of blood, which I guess is also a kind of dinner date. And of course, it turned out to be total garbage. Nobody was actually getting matched with donors. The only person getting fed was the scammer running it. Then you've got the vampire priests, who would sell you official vampire initiations. Like For $99.99, you too could join an ancient bloodline and get fancy certificate that basically said, "Congratulations, you're now Nosferatu." Honestly, it was like those buy a star and name it after yourself scams, but with more eyeliner. And here's the problem. Once you're in the headspace of magical thinking, your skepticism guard is down. You want to believe, and that makes you easy prey, pun absolutely intended, for people who see dollar signs instead of fangs. There's something I wish teenage me had understood. That is, vampires aren't just in folklore, they're also the grifters draining your wallet while you're too busy looking spooky in the mirror. Alright, let's do a thought experiment. What if human living vampires were actually right? Imagine you go to the hospital and instead of a blood bank, there's like a juice bar for vampires. "Hi, yes, I'll have a pint of O negative, shaken, not stirred."
Stirrings. Stirrings?
Or imagine energy vampires had donor clinics. You just walk in, sit down in a comfy chair, and someone stares at you really hard until you feel tired, and then they're like, "Thanks, I feel much better." Insurance companies would have to cover psychic drainage. Roommates would fight over who left the aura unshielded in the kitchen. It would be chaos. And the thing is, if vampirism were real, the real world would notice. Hospitals, scientists, governments, somebody would have picked up on it by now. The fact that it only lives in forums, surveys, and goth nightclubs tells you everything you need to know. So what do we make of all of this? For me, looking back at 13-year-old vampire Jess, it's hilarious, but also deeply human. I wanted mystery, identity, belonging. The vampire subculture gave me all three, at least for a while. The skeptical lesson here is humans crave patterns, stories, and belonging. Vampirism is one way people answer those cravings, and honestly, it's not the worst one. It's weird, sure, it's woo, yes, but at the heart of it is community and creativity. So, have you ever had a weird identity phase? Were you a vampire, a wizard, a crystal alien from the universe beside ours? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because apparently my undead aura fuels the algorithm, and I'll see you in the shadows.
You see.